Hello, WeeklyTrek listeners. This is your intrepid host and temporal agent, Alex Perry, coming from your past, my future. Just to let you know that this episode was recorded on Monday, November the 18th, which means that we were done and dusted with the show before the news came out about Noah Hawley potentially being tapped as writer and director for Star Trek IV. So you will not hear any Star Trek movie news in this episode, but we will talk about it in our first episode back after Thanksgiving. Enjoy the show. Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on November the 18th, 2019, and is current through the Star Trek Short Trek episode Ask Not, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 5 television shows at some point in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and my guest this week is Dr. Mohamed Noor. Mohamed, welcome to WeeklyTrek.
Hi there. Thank you for having me on the show.
It is my pleasure. It is not every day that I get a published author who has written about the Star Trek universe. You are my second published author, but unlike my previous guest, Scott Pearson, who had been published in the fiction realm, you have been published talking about Star Trek in the non-fiction realm.
That's right.
And I'd love it if you could tell me a little bit about your book.
Sure. So my book is called Live Long and Evolve: What Star Trek Can Teach Us About Evolution, Genetics, and Life on Other Worlds. And in essence, it is the introductory genetics and evolution course that I teach at Duke University, where I work. But it's framed using examples from Star Trek and principles from Star Trek to basically set the stage for each of the concepts presented.
Does threshold get a mention?
Oh, yes. There's quite a bit of discussion of threshold in Chapter 3.
How about the chase?
The chase is a lot of Chapter 2.
Very nice. Well, when you mentioned that you had published this book, I have added it to my Amazon wish list, and it is going on my list of requested Christmas presents from my wife. So I am hoping that I will unwrap it on Christmas Day.
I hope you enjoy it.
All right, Mohamed. Well, I asked my guest this question every week. I want to know something that's got you excited about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
So I've really been enjoying the short treks this time around. I mean, I liked the short treks last year, but I've really been enjoying the short treks this time around. And I really liked the Ask Not episode in particular. Mm-hmm. It was really nice to have Pike actually have a central role in a short trek and be elaborated a little bit. So that was pretty exciting. I liked that.
Yeah, we have had 3 short treks, and this was the one in which Pike had more than 2 or 3 lines in which to do anything. He's been in all 3, but only in very minor ways in the first 2. So yeah, it was really nice that we got one that did focus squarely on the character of Pike.
And done really well too, where most of it was in one room, but it was very captivating. The cinematography was excellent. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was only, like 9 minutes maybe?
It was very short, yeah.
The great thing about it was in 9 minutes, it still managed to tell a complete story that was satisfying and interesting at the same time.
Yeah, the one thing I thought it showed to me is that it provided proof that there are no lawyers in the 23rd century. Because there's no way you'd be allowed to blow up things without somebody knowing in front of them and then stress the person out and have no consequence at the end. They're just like, oh, okay, I'm happy now.
No lawyers, but still a distressing amount of legalese, right? Them splitting back and forth, all those Starfleet regulations.
Exactly.
So the thing I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week is something that I spotted on Twitter, which is that on the date that we're recording this podcast, that's November the 18th, Jeff Russo, the composer for Star Trek Discovery and the composer for Star Trek Picard, today recorded the main title theme for the new Star Trek Picard. So as of recording, it exists. Nobody's heard it yet, except for Russo and the musicians in the room. But we know it exists now. It is sitting in a file database somewhere and just waiting for the rest of us to hear it on January the 23rd, which is about 64 days away from now. And it is so exciting. It is getting so close. And the bells and whistles are coming together. And a Star Trek show isn't a Star Trek show without a killer main title theme. And so I am so excited to hear the Picard theme. Mohamed, music is one of those things that just is so quintessentially Star Trek, right?
Oh, yeah. Did you like the Enterprise theme? I'm curious.
It's not my favorite.
Yeah.
I think I'm in the minority. I prefer the season 1 and 2 version rather than the up-tempo.
The more jangly one.
Yeah.
I liked it by the end. Now I find myself singing with it anytime it's playing.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Now it's one of those indelible pieces of Star Trek history. I really enjoyed the visuals of the Enterprise title credit sequence.
Yes.
The song was an interesting experiment that was, I think, ultimately a bit of a misfire.
Yeah, though I did love the Mirror Universe version of that.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's, in some ways, that's why, you get those 2 episodes where you've got the more instrumental title theme. Mm-hmm. It makes it even starker how kind of odd the Faith of the Heart was for the rest of the show. Tend to skip it, I think, when I'm watching on. All right. Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
So our first story this week is an interview with Anson Mount conducted by comicbook.com. This is an interview in which Mount talks about the recent short trek that we were just discussing, Ask Not, and also talks a little bit about kind of hypothetically what he would like to see from a, again, hypothetical Pike show. So they talked a little bit about the short trek. Again, being 9 minutes long, it's, there's not a huge amount that you can kind of get from one of these actors as part of an interview. Mm-hmm. But he did talk about how he thought the interesting thing about the short trek was that it sort of explored the relationship between Pike's dedication and his humanity, because he does sort of have to put on this quite aggressive show in order to achieve his objective that, I think some people would consider potentially inhumane and unfair, Mohamed, to the point you were making about there not being lawyers in the 23rd century. I have a tough time believing that there are any legal minds who would allow that kind of exercise to pass in the 21st century in a management environment.
It was interesting watching it. I almost felt that maybe Pike was a fake or something, because the way he was saying it's what they deserve about the Thoins, those bastards with torpedoes, that didn't sound like him. I remember thinking maybe this isn't actually Pike, but it wasn't exactly right, but still. Or
maybe he's and Anson talks about this a bit in the interview. He sort of had to decide how good of an actor Pike was, because he is sort of putting on a show for this cadet. And I guess it turns out he's a fairly good actor. I would say not as good of an actor as Anson Mount, because I think tonally it does come off as a bit dissonant. It doesn't feel as true to the Pike character as it could. But in some ways, that's just because we know, what a paragon of virtue he is otherwise.
It's true. We probably know Pike better than cadet theorists do.
Exactly. Yeah. Where it's just this legendary captain who bursts into the room and starts bossing her around and seeing how she responds to that, which, would be extremely intimidating for anybody to be in that situation where
definitely
a reverent figure who is known only by reputation rather than fact kind of, bursts into a room and starts shouting at people.
Yeah, definitely. Completely agree.
He talked a little bit about Discovery Season 2. He was asked what was his personal favorite moments from Season 2 of Discovery, and he picked out 3. One, that first bridge scene from the season premiere, Brother, in which he kind of introduces himself and then asks the crew to introduce themselves.
I like that scene a lot.
Oh, that scene is so good. It's such a good cut point between Lorca and Pike, right?
Definitely.
That moment of sort of establishing, I'm a very different captain because Lorca never bothered to ask you what any of your names were. And here I am in the first 5 minutes, kind of setting myself apart.
And even saying, and forget your ranks, we don't need those. That was very impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Brother, also Through the Valley of Shadows, which was the episode in which he got a glimpse of his future and, sort of made the decision in order to get access to the time crystal, that would be his future, despite the sort of horrific nature of it, which was such an acting tour de force that I imagine was probably pretty difficult for him as an actor, but it seems like he really liked it.
Yeah.
And lastly, his other kind of favorite moment from Star Trek Discovery Season 2 was anytime he got the opportunity to work with Tig Notaro, which I was just watching the Season 2 Blu-ray set yesterday, and the commentary track that Alex Kurtzman and Sonequa Martin Green did for Brother, and they seem to agree. Everybody seems to love Tig Notaro. She seems to be a fabulous presence on set that everybody seems to like.
It's great that she's funny both in real life and in the show. That's great.
Exactly, yeah. The character definitely works very well with the actress's sensibilities and style. He also talked about the difficulty of speaking technobabble, which was funny because it just felt so, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? I mean, you could have taken those lines about how difficult it is to pass this kind of techno speak that doesn't have much context behind it and applied that to literally any of the actors from any of the series since 1987.
Yeah. That reminds me, in various interviews I've seen with Andre Bormanis, he tells a great story about meeting the actress who plays Jadzia Dax. And at one point in time, she apparently grabs him by the collar and says, "You're the one who gave me those lines." About some of the science gobbledygook that he gave her. Of course, in good humor, not in a hostile way, but I think it startled him the first time.
It definitely seems to be a recurring theme of actors on Star Trek that the technobabble is not their favorite, to put it lightly.
Definitely so.
And then the other interesting thing, I guess the last interesting thing about the interview that really stood out to me was Anson Mount was asked hypothetically about a Pike show, what do you think that show should be? And he actually said he thought that unlike Star Trek Discovery, the Pike show should be more episodic in nature, a quote, big idea of the week kind of thing, which actually, given that we have a serialized show in Discovery, a serialized show in Picard, a serialized show in the Nickelodeon show, likely serialized for Section 31, and episodic for Lower Decks, it would be nice to add an episodic live action show. In many ways, just as a way of setting it apart from the other more serialized shows. What do you think about that?
I completely agree. And I think that would draw in more of the people who love Next Generation's episodic style. So I think it's a great way of doing it.
And also, a lot of people say, and it's true, and I agree with them, that television has changed a lot, and it has leaned much harder into that serialized style of storytelling. But if you're doing so much Star Trek, why not kind of play with the format a little more?
Exactly. Have infinite diversity and infinite combinations.
Precisely.
So Anson Mount actually at Star Trek Las Vegas teased the audience at one point in time where he said, in all seriousness, "Well, I have an announcement to make," and everybody sort of gasped. And he said, "I'm going to go look for the coffee."
Yes, he has been enjoying playing with people's hopes and dreams.
Oh, yeah.
But as I talked about on the episode last week, I continue to believe it's only a matter of time before they announce something. So
that would be great.
And hopefully it is an episodic series.
Hopefully so. And like I said before, it makes sense to have something that matches Next Generation, because there aren't that many like that right now.
So our second story this week is actually a really interesting one.
Yes.
CBS Television Studios and the Television Academy Foundation have launched a year-round Star Trek internship program named, very appropriately, the Star Trek Command Training Program. This is an internship that will be available for undergraduate and graduate students nationwide. So both of us are out of the running. And I think probably most of my listeners are out of the running as well. But if you do happen to be a college student, now is the time to strike while the iron is hot. This actually seems like a really interesting internship program. Effectively, 2 interns per semester will be placed on a Star Trek series, one of the Star Trek series that's under development. And according to the press release, will be actively engaged in the writers' rooms, the wardrobe design, on-set production, animation, and post-production in Los Angeles-based facilities. So you probably won't travel to the set, but you get to see a large amount of everything else. And Picard is actually filmed in Los Angeles, so there would potentially be an opportunity there. I mean, what an incredible experience for a college student to get a behind-the-scenes look at television production. I mean, obviously, they are doing this for college students who have an interest in filmmaking and want to make a career out of it, so they can kind of see how television production works. But I would love to do it just from the Star Trek perspective of getting hands-on on building a Star Trek show from the ground up. Mohamed, were it not that we could go back in time and apply for this, right?
I would so much want to do this. When I was in college, I used to say that my dream job was to do something almost like that. That sounds amazing. I like that they tied it to this idea of diversity and inclusivity. So one of the materials for the application, it says, is you have to write how Star Trek has inspired your personal commitment to diversity and inclusivity, including how this program will help you promote the voices and stories of underrepresented communities. That was pretty striking. I mean, it wasn't just a lot of Star Trek, but how are you going to actually use this to better the world? That was pretty impressive.
Yeah, we have really seen the Star Trek production start to practice what it preaches on issues on promoting diversity and inclusion. And the short treks are a great example too. We had a lot of writers of color, directors of color, composers. You know, the short trek, the first short trek this season, Q&A, was the first Star Trek that had ever had its music composed by a woman.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Every previous episode and every previous movie was scored by a man, and Q&A was the first one that had a woman.
Wow.
Which is,
overdue.
Probably well overdue, but great to see. They do seem to be making really intentional choices about trying to foster new talent. The short treks, again, the writers and the directors and those composers don't really have many credits to their name, which is fabulous because now they have a major Hollywood production that they can point to in order to grow their careers. And
absolutely,
it's great that they're reaching even further back into the college student pool to try and lift up new voices and new ideas and diverse talent to, hopefully one day go work for those Star Trek shows full time.
That would be wonderful. I taught a class actually last semester at Duke called Genetics, Evolution, and Star Trek. And I forwarded the ad about this opportunity to all the students who were in that class. Several of them responded very positively. So there definitely is interest among the younger groups in doing this.
Well, I guess they know where to go if they need a letter of recommendation, right?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I think they need a chaperone.
Whatever it takes, right?
Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, I've never really regretted no longer being a college student until now.
Yep.
I would give my left arm to be in college right now and have the opportunity to apply for this and get the opportunity to go and do it. If you are a college student and you would like to apply to participate in the internship program, applications for 2020 are now open, and they are open until January the 21st, 2020, 2 days before the premiere of Star Trek Picard. So if you're interested in applying, you can go to televisionacademy.com/internships. So, moving from internship opportunities in the Star Trek universe to merchandise opportunities in the Star Trek universe, Chronicle Collectibles have announced some new Star Trek items. Chronicle Collectibles are familiar to Star Trek fans as having done the line of Star Trek liquors, for having done the recent line of Star Trek Cats models, and also for the rather impressive 12-inch Enterprise D lit-up model that was on display at Star Trek Las Vegas. They have announced a series of busts that they are making, 2 character busts. They'll be releasing in late 2020 Captain Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek The Next Generation and Captain Pike as seen in Star Trek Discovery. These are big, impressive busts. They each measure over a foot tall and weigh 6 pounds each, so don't go dropping it off of any high places. They're made from a polyresin material and painted with a faux bronze finish. They will set you back a decent amount if you're interested in purchasing them, though. Each retails for about $150, $149.99. But very cool to get a Pike, anything really in the merchandise front.
Absolutely.
And they look pretty good. I think when I first saw one picture of them from profile, I was a little iffy, but now I've seen kind of more pictures going the full way around. I'm actually pretty impressed with the likenesses of these 2 characters, which are quite difficult. Mohamed, do you think these will be gracing your bookshelves anytime soon?
I don't know about with that price tag, but they are very attractive. I will say that. I have always been tempted. You've probably seen that there's a company that has the Picard facepalm one.
Yes.
That one is slightly more tempting to me than these, but these are definitely much more appealing just from an artistic viewpoint.
Yes, ThinkGeek made a bust of the Picard facepalm meme, which has to be one of the more obscure pieces of Star Trek merchandise that's ever been released.
Yeah, I would be more tempted to get that one, just for the humor to it.
But it is always nice to see new Discovery merchandise.
Definitely. And Pike is a great choice. I don't think anybody's going to want a Lorca one, much as I loved Lorca.
Yeah, right, yeah.
That would just be intimidating.
Yeah, you probably need those kind of characters that you're putting up on your bookshelf probably should be people you look up to rather than people who don't necessarily have much of a moral compass.
Yes, exactly.
And our last story this week concerns the Star Trek wine line. Earlier this year at Star Trek Las Vegas, Star Trek Wines premiered 2 wines, Chateau Picard and the Federation Old Reserve Zinfandel, which we talked about on our STLV episode with Jamie McGregor. And on that episode, we talked about how Star Trek Wines would, by the end of the year, be offering Chateau Picard by the case, and they now are, in fact, doing so and selling it on their website, StarTrekWines.com. This is only available in the United States, unfortunately, because shipping wine internationally is very expensive and quite difficult from a regulatory perspective. But Star Trek Wines are now offering Chateau Picard in both 6 and 12 bottle cases. The great thing about both of these cases, and particularly the 12 bottle case, is that the 12 bottle case is presented in a wooden box that's basically identical to the wooden box that you see in the very first trailer for Star Trek Picard. That very first shot is him placing a wooden crate of the wine bottles down, and they've taken great pains to recreate that wine bottle crate so that it looks, I think, very, very similar to the one that's seen on screen. I wasn't able to look closely enough to see if it was identical, but at first glance looked very similar. So you not only get this fantastic wooden crate to go with it, and there's a smaller version of the wooden crate for the 6-bottle version, but you also get either 6 or 12 bottles of Chateau Picard. I have 3 myself. I have not yet opened them, but they are glorious, beautiful bottles. Even if you're not much of a wine drinker, they are collector's items alone. But because you are buying what are effectively $100 bottles of wine, if you buy a 6-bottle case or a 12-bottle case, it is going to set you back a pretty penny. So a 6-bottle case is $499 and a 12-bottle case is $899. Though, as I was doing the math on it, I realized that, so if it's a $100 bottle of wine, if you just buy one, if you buy the 6-bottle case, you're effectively getting 1 bottle free. If you buy the 12-bottle case, you're effectively getting 3 bottles free. So it does make the per unit cost a bit cheaper if you get the collector's cases. And if you think you're going to drink a decent amount of Chateau Picard, which I certainly might, I've been thinking about it, I'm definitely going to crack open a bottle for the premiere, but I'd like to crack open one beforehand just to try it. This might be the one for you. Hello, Weekly Trek listeners. Temporal Agent Alex Perry here again, still coming from your past and my future. I know it's confusing, but you'll figure it out. Just to let you know that since we recorded this episode, there has been an announcement of a sale by Star Trek Wines. There is a 20% off sale for Black Friday on both of the cases and the 2-pack gift set of the Chateau Picard and the Federation Reserve Special Zinfandel. So those prices that I mentioned in the regular episode, take 20% off those. Those are the prices right now for Black Friday. So if you're interested, that's an even more compelling reason to buy. It's a lovely wooden crate, wouldn't you say, Mohamed?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So is Chateau Picard a real thing?
Yes. So
that's fascinating.
This is Chateau Picard, and the labels on the bottle are the fictional Chateau Picard of the 24th century Le Bar, France, the Picard family, Jean-Luc Picard, Robert Picard, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. The wine on the inside is the real Chateau Picard that exists outside of Bordeaux, France. I think they're a 3rd-generation winery. They make a Cru Bordeaux, so that's what the wine is in the bottle. And I was talking to the head of the company at STLV, and he was explaining that it had sort of been the holy grail for CBS for a long time to strike up a deal with Chateau Picard to sell Chateau Picard as the Star Trek wine.
Yeah.
And they'd never really managed it because the Chateau Picard winery had worried that the company was not going to take their wine seriously as a product. They were just going to stick a zany Star Trek label on it and call it a day. And given some of the more rubbish wines that there have been previous to this one, where, they had a Klingon blood wine, it was basically just a red wine with a stupid label on it. I think they were right to be concerned. But this new company and this new product, they went to so much trouble to do the label so that it appeared almost exactly the same way that it appears in Star Trek Picard, but B, also passes muster with the very difficult kind of wine regulatory agencies that have very strict standards about what must be on the bottles, which obviously the props department didn't pay attention to when they were making the bottles for the show. So yeah, it is fictional Chateau Picard on the outside, real Chateau Picard on the inside.
So in theory, you could have a bottle of Chateau Picard wine that was made prior to when The Next Generation aired.
Yes, you could. I'm sure they do exist somewhere.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. It's a cool little story. And they have all these plans to kind of do a genuine Klingon blood wine and do Bajoran spring wine and everything else. But a lot of that depends on how well Chateau Picard sells. The first run of the bottle sold out within about 12 hours.
Wow.
So it's been fairly popular. We'll see. The cases are obviously a lot more expensive. That's a tough ask for $500 or $900. But if it's good wine, I think people will buy it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't drink, but that sounds great.
I don't drink much either, but as a collector's item, I felt like I had to have at least one, and because the idea behind it is so, it's neat that it's real Chateau Picard, and the guy said the best thing to do with it is to age it and kind of keep it, for a few years before you open it. So you get a bottle and you just tell people that, you're just waiting for it to be absolutely perfect.
That makes sense.
All right. Well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, I and my guest give you a wish or a theory we're nurturing about the future of the franchise. So Mohamed, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
I would love to see more of the Voyager cast in Star Trek Picard when it comes out. And, we know the 7 of 9 is going to be in there, but it'd be fascinating to see, did Harry Kim ever get promoted, for example, or just see more of what happened with the Voyager crew.
I love that. So there's been this thing going around about this shot in the New York Comic-Con trailer of 7 of 9 clutching somebody who looks like they might be dead and is very upset about it. And the question is, who are they? And
is it Chakotay?
Is it Chakotay, or is it the child that 7 of 9 and Chakotay had after they returned from the Delta Quadrant?
Oh.
Yeah, so could be that, but I guess Robert Picardo says he's been approached about appearing in Star Trek Picard Season 2, so the Doctor, might be making an appearance. Who would you most like to see out of the Voyager cast make an appearance?
I'd probably say Harry Kim.
Figure out if he's still Ensign Kim or not.
That's right. Just see what he's been up to. He's somebody who seemed he had the most growth potential.
He absolutely did, yeah, and felt like was the most shortchanged by being stuck in the Delta Quadrant.
Agreed.
Yeah. What was it? Endgame? He was Captain Harry Kim of the USS Rhode Island.
Oh, yeah.
It'd be nice to see him pop up again.
Definitely. I'm sure Garrett would be up for it, the actor.
Oh, I'm sure he would. Who wouldn't? I think a lot of them, except for the actors who probably had to wear a lot of heavy makeup and and wouldn't be thrilled about returning to do that. Like, Michael Dorn doesn't seem to be thrilled about the idea of putting the warp makeup back on.
Not fair.
But the human or the light makeup ones, go visit some friends, re-energize your appearances on the convention circuit. Sounds like a plan.
Definitely. What about you?
I would like to see Kate Mulgrew as Janeway. I would like to see Admiral Janeway in Star Trek Picard. I would love to see Picard and Janeway debating anything.
Yeah, I agree. That would be fantastic. Wow.
Yeah. We got that one conversation between them in Nemesis, but it was great, but it was small potatoes, right? Yeah. I want them each to have a position that they feel very strongly about and that they feel very strongly is the right moral justified position.
I love it.
And go at each other.
I love it.
For an entire episode, I could just see those two. I just think that would be To hear those two debate each other would be fabulous.
It would be fascinating. I would love to see that.
And it might be the kind of thing that there's an opening for, because Starfleet, Picard seems to be outside of Starfleet. It does seem like, from the trailer where he's shouting at the Admiral that maybe him and Starfleet aren't on the best of terms anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You could see a scenario in which Janeway's still in Starfleet and Picard does something and it runs afoul of what Starfleet's trying to do, and, they have a confrontation. Oh, that'd be so good.
I agree. That's a great suggestion.
So my theory this week is about Black Friday, which is coming up. So every year, La La Land Records, who has produced the soundtrack compilations for a number of the movies and for the TV shows, puts out a number of releases on Black Friday. And we are overdue for this year's Star Trek TV release. We have been anticipating Star Trek Voyager Volume 2 all year. And so my theory is that Star Trek Voyager Volume 2 will be announced next week as one of the Black Friday releases. Been a few years since they've had a Star Trek release on Black Friday. I think the last one was Star Trek Enterprise Volume 2, which was either 2 or 3 years ago at this point. But I'm ready for it. We've not had a release of Star Trek music from the 1990 shows since Star Trek Voyager Volume 1, which was early 2018. And I'm jonesing for it. These soundtrack collections are fabulous, contain lots of the episodic music from the shows, and are the literal soundtrack to my life, so I can't get enough of them. So I had my fingers firmly crossed. La La Land Records, give us that Star Trek Voyager Volume 2 as a Christmas present this year. Mohamed, do you own any of the Star Trek music for yourself?
Not legally.
Understood, sir. Understood.
I love the music, though. I listen to it a lot.
I can't work and listen to music that has words. So I can't just turn on the radio. For me, it has to be instrumental. I need something to distract me from the noise around me, but it can't be something that has a vocal track of its own. And so Star Trek music is perfect, particularly the stuff from the 90s. The hit on it was a lot of it was sonic wallpaper. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. You just need something that isn't super intrusive into what you're doing. So, but, La La Land does have a really good way of finding all of the really interesting and amazing pieces of music that there were throughout the shows, even from the years in which people were kind of ragging on it as being, not terribly interesting.
I do enjoy some of the music from the original series like this, for example. Just that sort of background. So ominous.
It's great. And I also have the original series collection that they put out, which is a beast of literally every cue from the original series.
Oh yeah.
And it's probably 8, 9, 10 hours worth of music just by itself. Easily. Yeah. Do you have a theory or wish for Discovery, Picard, or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of WeeklyTrek. Thank you so much to my guest, Mohamed Noor, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Mohamed, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
I'm on Twitter at M like Michael, A, F like Frank, Noor, N like November, OOR.
And I'm assuming your book is available from all reputable retailers?
Oh, yeah. It's on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, whichever place you have. And there's an audiobook version as well in Audible.
And you can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Mohamed. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.